So, welcome, Michael Levine-Clark, to ATG, the podcast. Michael Levine-Clark is Dean of the University of Denver Library and one of the best-known figures in the library circuit, a regular figure at conferences and events. I hope in this hour to talk to cover at least some of your many activities, Michael. So, welcome.
Yeah, thanks. Really glad to be here, Michael.
Let's start with your background. I believe you started out studying history. Is that correct?
Sort of correct. I started getting I did get an undergraduate history degree, and then went to library school after that. While I was at library school, I was also applying for master's programs in history. So I got the master's in history after the MLS, and I did so because at the time there were a lot of job ads that seem to require or at least prefer a second master's degree in a subject area, but also it felt like a useful thing if I was going to be an academic librarian to have some advanced experience in really any discipline, and history was always the discipline I was most interested in.
Absolutely. So, do you think it helps you as a former academic that of actually sort of having done some work, sort of at least graduate work in history, to then come to the library with that perspective?
I think so. Although it took a while to learn that my history-focused, history-centric perspective was not the norm, right? There are well, obviously, academic libraries support all disciplines, and history is very book focused, and I think as an early career librarian, I tended to think more about the book than about the journal, when, in course, for most disciplines, the journal and the article are the most important. So while it was valuable and it continues to be valuable, I'm not positive that it made me better prepared in any way to be a librarian than if I had just gotten the MLS and started out as a librarian from there.
At least you didn't make what I think is the mistake that many people in this space make, which is assuming that everything is a journal and books don't really exist. So you didn't
Right.
you didn't fall into that trap.
No, true. Yeah, I care about journals, and I do think that I tend to think about the humanities a lot as we think about broader issues within librarianship and within scholarly publishing. Humanities are often left out of those conversations. Certainly, as we talk about read and publish deals and transformative agreements, there's not an obvious place for the humanities. And so I do hope that at the very least, I've been an effective advocate for the humanities in my institution and across the profession.
Mm-hmm. So you started at University of Denver. What was the first job you had in the library?
So I came here, before I came here, I was a government documents librarian, actually focused on state, foreign, and international documents at the University of Iowa. Documents, really, in a way, it was all government documents outside of U.S. federal. And I loved that job and came to Denver as a trailing spouse. My wife is a history professor and came to Denver for that reason. I lucked into a temporary reference job at the University of Denver, which became a permanent reference job with a search, right? So after a search, I got the job permanently. Did that for a while. Became a collections librarian, which also required a search, and did that for a while, and then became an associate dean, and then ultimately the dean. That early work as a reference librarian was wonderful. I really enjoyed the fact that you learn enough about somebody's topic to help them find information, right? You sort of go all in on whatever topic that is for an hour or two, maybe for an hour a day for several days, and then you move on to whatever the next topic is. And I loved that work. It was a lot of fun to sort of engage in some ways quite deeply in a topic for a small amount of time, and then send that person that you'd been helping off to do the writing, while I'd then move on to another topic. So reference was a lot of fun in that regard.
I see you haven't lost your interest in reference because I noticed that you're still involved in. I think you're involved in the on the editorial board or editing some sort of major library science tome, an information science tome. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I was the co-editor, and I guess still am technically the co-editor of the Encyclopedia of Library and Information Sciences, which is print and online. I think most people probably get it online at this point. It's the fourth edition. I wasn't part of the first three editions, but co-editing that was an interesting experience and a chance to really try to dig in and define what is librarianship now, and by now I mean 6 or 8 years ago when we edited that set. We're still there to edit updates to the online version, though the sort of the bulk of that editorial work happens as a new edition comes out.
Mm-hmm. So you're all at Denver, having been at Denver for many years. You're very well placed to look at how the role of the library has changed from just within one institution. So, what do you think has been the biggest change in the years that you've been at Denver?
Um, it, I mean, I think probably the biggest change is the fact that 25 years ago, we were really at the very early stages of providing information over the web. And certainly when I started as a librarian 30 years ago, the library was the place where you went for information, right? The library's role was the main source of information content for the institution. And we've moved from that paradigm where the library was the collection to a paradigm where the library helps you access information, which is everywhere, and in fact far more information is available outside the library than within the library, right? So the degree to which we have to help navigate this incredibly complex, information-rich world, I think that's the thing that's the most different. That it's not the case anymore that you go to the library to find information, right? You go to the library to help make sense of this really complex information landscape. And unfortunately, in many cases, you don't go to the library, right? And maybe struggle to find information. Maybe you become good at it. But the one real big challenge is trying to convince people who don't necessarily use the library that the library is incredibly valuable. And I say don't necessarily use the library because they may very well be using the library through the resources that we subscribe to, even if they are using Google Scholar on campus and don't quite realize that they're accessing materials we subscribe to.
Mm.
I think the other related, very different thing from 25 years ago is that 25 years ago you needed to use the physical library much more than you necessarily need to now, right? The library website is the library for many of our users, particularly people who are journal users and are using entirely electronic collections. So the library building still matters, and it matters for both as a service point and as a place to store collections, and also as a place to be in a quiet environment for studying. But we need to be paying just as close attention to our web presence, because for many of our users, that is the primary way that they access it, or maybe even the only way that they access the library.
That seems to tally. There was a very interesting recent debate at the Researcher to Reader conference on whether the library should be abolished, and the consensus seemed to be that the library building wasn't so important, but the librarian staff, the library staff, were. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I think as we've moved from this um, collection focused library system where the main thing that we did was build collections and everything else was sort of in service to that. As we've moved from that into this role where we are the intermediaries in many ways for content that is maybe in our collections, maybe is elsewhere. Uh, the services around teaching people how to find and evaluate information, helping people understand which information sources they can trust and which they can't, uh, helping people to use a mix of content that we've subscribed to and that is freely available out in the internet. That becomes more and more important. And we've also moved into providing services around information use that I think we didn't do before, at least not nearly to that extent. And so services around data visualization, around text and data mining, around uh, uh, even creating podcasts and so on, right? That the way that the library has positioned itself as a sort of as the primary uh, central campus space for making sense of information across the board. Um, that's vitally important, and that's all about people. The building, on some level, is it. I love the library as a building, and I love the physical collections, and I care deeply about our physical collections. But um, if we had a choice between closing the physical library and closing off our web presence, it would be a fairly easy choice, I think, to maintain the web presence and close the building. And similarly, if we had a choice between investing in more collections and more space versus investing in more people, investing in the people would be that too would be an easy choice.
Fascinating. Well, perhaps we can come back to some of those aspects of what the library does later, but can we move on to some of the talking about some of the current issues that you've been involved with? One of your many activities that I was fascinated by was a presentation you gave. I picked it up at a recent conference, but I think you've given it at other conferences as well, on looking at metrics or the cost to libraries of read and publish and transformative agreements. Can you give us an outline of what that research was?
Yeah, and yeah, happy to. And this is research that I've done in partnership with John McDonald at EBSCO and Jason Price at Skelk, as well as Heather Staines at Delta Think at times, and Peter McCracken from Cornell was participating in some of it as well. And I want to make sure that they get credit for that. We've done a number of studies that try to dig into the data around not just transformative agreements, but big deals as well, right? How do you measure the value of a big deal? How do you measure the value of a read and publish agreement? And not just how do you measure the value after you've already been in it, but how do you measure the potential value up front? And there's a lot to unpack there, but the sort of the high level summary is that in order to understand whether a read and publish deal with a particular publisher makes sense for your institution, you need to know more than we know now about the publishing patterns at your institution. Sort of the getting a sense of the total number of publications with a publisher is not that hard. Total number of articles, but when you start to dig into the things that matter for a read and publish deal, it becomes really complicated. One of those things is what is a research article, and what is covered under a transformative agreement. You can certainly get that from the publisher, right? They can explain that to you. But when you search something like Scopus or Web of Science, or even the publisher website, there's no consistency in what is described as a research article, right? There's different terminology for that, and therefore, unless you have a really clear understanding of it for each tool that you're using, I don't think you can get an easy answer about the number of research articles with a particular publisher for your institution. Another thing that's complicated is corresponding author. You can easily find the corresponding author if you click on the article itself. Right, it shows it pretty clearly, and you can download a spreadsheet of information from Web of Science or Scopus about your institution's publishing patterns, but there's no. And it does show corresponding author to some extent, but it's not an easy thing to get, and it's actually fairly hard to go in and do a search for corresponding authors from this particular publisher at the University of Denver, and it's understandable because we've never had any real reason to keep track of corresponding author. It hasn't been a thing that mattered that much before, but it's fundamentally important if you're going to negotiate a read and publish deal. I think, hold on, let me think here for a second. I guess the other thing that's really complicated and also not easy to navigate is who paid the APCs, right? So how much have you paid a particular publisher to publish the articles of your institution's researchers in the past? A publisher can certainly tell you, right? So if a publisher came to me and wanted to start a read and publish deal, they'd be able to say, this many APCs were paid by your institution's authors. But I don't know, and they don't know, whether those came from departmental funds, whether those came from the research grant, whether those came from a central office on campus like the Office of Research, whether it came from library funds, whether it came from personal funds, or whether, despite the fact that the corresponding author is supposed to pay the APC, perhaps it came from co-authors at another institution. None of that is easy to find, and you need to have a better sense of what the institutional costs are already before you decide to move into a transformative agreement. So that's all just stuff on the front end of deciding whether to do a read and publish deal. There's more. Those things have to be looked at over time as well, right? So I think we need to be thinking as libraries and as publishers about how to be a little bit more consistent in displaying those different types of information.
I think this is what you must have meant. I noticed the phrase, and I was astonished by your work and this data that you couldn't find. You said in one place, broad comparisons are very challenging due to limitations in general data sources, and this is things like not knowing what a research article is, which is pretty fundamental.
Right. Yeah, and I think and again, I don't want to say I don't think anybody's really to blame here, right? I think different publishers describe research articles with different terminology, and that's never really been a problem, right? It's really the case that we're trying to use metadata to make decisions that we haven't had to make before, right? So the fact that the data are inconsistent and I guess just the fact that we don't follow standards is because there haven't needed to be standards for this before.
Can you think of a way of improving it? Do you know who do you think would, where would the action start? Do you think to fix this kind of problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think NISO is the obvious place for information standards around corresponding author, around APCs, around and then there's institutional affiliation, which is another issue, right? All of those, I think, would benefit and some of those there already are standards for institution, but I think all of us would benefit from there being something centralized, and NISO is, to me, is the place to do that.
Makes sense. Going on further on this theme of metadata, and I noticed that you recently stated that an increasing number of your staff hires for the library don't have a master's degree in library science. So, what kind of qualifications are you looking for in the when you hire new staff?
Yeah, it's a. I guess I want to lead off by saying that we are looking for degrees beyond the MLS. And it's not necessarily a criticism of library and information science programs or library and information science schools. It's more a sense that we are expanding the types of services that we provide in libraries. So we are hiring positions that don't have an MLS, or they might have an MLS, but we're not requiring it, because we're looking for skills that other disciplines are better at. Other disciplines have focused on those in the first place. And so just a couple of examples of things we've recently hired or are in the process of hiring. We hired an exhibits librarian not too long ago, and I think we maybe preferred the MLS, but we might not have even done that. We hired somebody who has a museum studies background and a museum studies degree, and we were hiring this position both to create exhibits in the library, exhibits from our collections and exhibits from local artists and exhibits from across campus. And while you can train a librarian to do that work, we figured why not hire somebody who's already got a degree in that. The other thing that position does is work with a lot of different classes to incorporate exhibits into the assignment for that course, and that where the outcome might be an exhibit using our archives that we then mount in the library. Again, how you create an exhibit is already a specialization of another discipline. So we figured that was more important than hiring somebody who understood libraries at a deep level. And this person has worked really well and has gained a deeper understanding of the library, but I think we would have been making a mistake if we had limited that just to an MLS. We're also in the process right now of hiring a digital user experience librarian, right? So somebody whose job it is to make our website and our discovery tools as friendly for users as possible. You could hire somebody who's got a library background and a library degree, and they could learn how to sort of do the UX stuff. But again, there's there are degrees in human computer interaction and on the sort of the designing for the web. And so we figured that was more important for that particular position than an MLS. And there clearly is a learning curve once you have somebody in a position like that. They need to understand how library metadata works. They need to understand the way that the discovery system interacts with a knowledge base, and the way the discovery system interacts with our catalog. They need to understand how third-party vendors work in the library space, and so on, right? They need to learn all that, but part of what somebody who's getting a degree in that area learns is how to learn about a new discipline, right? Because their job is to create a satisfying user experience for whichever area they end up getting hired into. So I guess just two examples that show that we need to be expanding the way we think about the services we provide, and we're not necessarily teaching those things in library schools, but we don't necessarily need to be teaching those things in library schools. I think what we need to be doing as a profession is letting go of the idea that a librarian has to have an MLS, right? You can be a librarian and be a very good librarian with a different background.
Do you think the same applies to bibliometrics, where people coming on board with lots and lots of really quite sort of sophisticated skills in being able to interpret and to measure data?
Yeah, I mean, right, and we are. I think if you go back to sort of the I'm stumbling there. Sorry. If you go back to the way that we've always sort of trained librarians, right? We were trained to build collections and to assess collections, but sort of that higher level, deeper analysis of the bibliometrics is not something that we were necessarily trained to do, and yet having really deep and broad understandings of how information is used and how it's presented is something that matters to us a lot. But our way of assessing collections is in some ways kind of basic, right? The idea that you look at usage data, and then you make decisions based on that, rather than looking at a richer array of data around collections, which I think we're doing to some extent. But yeah, we absolutely could learn from bibliometrics how to dig a little bit deeper into the usage and the value of our collections.
Can we talk a little bit about institutional repositories? These they were launched maybe 20 years ago as a sort of as a way of promoting open research, but in some ways they've become an established part of the landscape. But do you think their role has changed since that initial flurry of enthusiasm?
Yeah, I think probably. And I want to say up front, I don't think that they've ever been particularly good at promoting open research. There are places where people have to deposit something for whatever reason. And they either have to deposit an article because their funder has told them they have to, or because the institution has told them they have to. I don't think that repositories have made that big a difference in pushing people to make their work open. There are absolutely people in our institutions who care deeply about open access and want to make their articles or their data sets or whatever open, and work with the library on the repository for that reason. But I think that for the most part, the people who use the repository do so because on some level they have to, and so it doesn't really promote an expansion of open research. It enables, I guess, because of other factors, but it's funder mandates and it's requirements of the institution in some cases that have led to the growth of the growth and success of repositories.
Do you think the OSTP Nelson memo and any kind of legislation that comes out of it is likely to change that position?
Well, I mean, I think it's likely to reinforce the fact that people are putting things in repositories because we've provided a service that helps people be compliant with their funder requirements. And I don't think that's not a slam on repositories in any way, right? I think the reality is that researchers want to publish their article. They want their information to be as broadly accessible as possible. To the extent that we can help them put a version of that article up on a university website and in an open version that is maybe more discoverable and is accessible to more people, all of that's great, and all of that is something that helps our researchers and helps the institution too. But I think the Nelson memo simply adds more teeth to what was already an expectation that if you're funded by certain agencies, you need to make a version of your article open. And so I don't think that the repository itself is the thing that promotes open research, right? It helps, but the fact that funders have gotten behind open research, I think, is far more important, and has a much deeper impact on publishing and on the way that our repositories are going to be used.
Let's come back to that open research topic. I'm going to tell you a few figures from a recent Clarivate survey, not because this survey was, I think, in any way exceptional, just because of the kind of attitudes that it revealed, which I think are very interesting. So this was a survey of some 1,500 libraries done earlier this year, and one of the things that surprised me was that it seemed that open science and open access mandates didn't appear to be major drivers for change in the library. Something like only 14% of people interviewed said that those were actually sort of having a big effect on the library. Do you agree with that?
I don't know whether to agree or disagree. So I guess I agree to the extent that libraries aren't in the sort of the broad range of things that we do. We're not doing that much to support open access, right? If you think about the collections budget and what we spend on subscriptions versus what we spend on all of the support we give to open access, it's right. It's a drop in the bucket. The university is giving us the money for licensing content, right? They're giving us money to subscribe to journal content that we don't otherwise have. They might be giving us funds for open access, but they're giving it at a much, much lower rate, right? So I think to that extent, I guess I agree with that statement. But to the extent that we've moved the needle a little bit, I disagree with that statement. I think that at least in my institution, the OSTP memos have made a difference. They've convinced our Office of Research that we need to be taking open access more seriously than that office felt before. They've convinced the provost's office or they've helped me convince the provost office that we need more funding to support APCs and to support the transition to open. And they've certainly been the driver for getting people to deposit data sets and open articles of some sort into the repository, right? So I think without those mandates, we'd be much further behind than we are. But we haven't really gone that far when you think about the sort of the overall landscape of what libraries do and how we spend our money.
It's a little bit, I understand exactly what you say, but it's a little bit disappointing. Do you think that, imagine if the library wasn't involved in encouraging open research, would anybody be doing it at the university?
Probably not. I mean, I think other than, of course, ensuring that people are being compliant with the funder requirements, right? But the library worked with the provost. This must have been in around 2008, 2010, somewhere in that time period. We put on a provost conference, which is, an annual 2-day conference for the faculty. And we were able to convince the provost at the time that it would be great to run a 2-day conference on open access.
Mm-hmm.
And we brought in speakers. We had panels of people who both edited open access journals and were kind of committed to open access at the time, and we're trying to make sure that they were publishing that way. Heather Joseph from Spark came and gave a keynote, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so it was a good 1-day conference, and we had pretty good turnout, but it led absolutely nowhere. Right, we didn't change the way that this institution interacts with openness in any meaningful way. I had a few people come to me and say, I want to publish my next monograph as an open monograph, or I'm really interested in you helping me understand how to retain my rights. But it was a really small number of people who actually came to the library and interacted with us about open access after that conference. In contrast, sort of once we started seeing U.S. federal funding agencies, once they started to mandate open access for the publications funded by that research, that's when we started to see some change at the institutional level. And I think I veered away from your question, which I think was if the library wasn't doing it, would anybody be? So I guess the answer really is, to the extent that there is a mandate, somebody on campus would be paying attention to it, right? The Office of Research would be paying attention to it, but the library, and in conversation with our Office of Research, it's become both our Vice Provost for Research's expectation and sort of the broader expectation of our research community that the library is the leader in open access initiatives. And that's both in terms of helping with compliance, but also in terms of whatever other initiatives people might be interested in.
It's good to hear. Maybe, possibly, to some extent, is a victory that's already been won without our even noticing it, because the arrival of preprint servers means that there's now a very high proportion of scholarly content which is available for discussion and the kind of interchange of views before publication. We've got round the paywall, as it were. Do you think that's true?
Yeah. I think that's true. Yeah. And I think that the experience of COVID, and, sort of the rapid advances in understanding the virus and in getting a vaccine and in doing research about how to test and so on, all of that was attributable to preprints and to open data sources. And even for people who don't work in that domain, I think it increased the visibility of preprint servers, and it increased the visibility of the conversations that we've been having within libraries, for sure, for many years. It increased the visibility of those conversations to a wider range of scholars and administrators at our universities, right? So I think there's been this demonstrated effect of preprint servers that there's some disciplinary differences there for sure. There are, you know, that we started out talking about the humanities a little bit, and certainly people in the humanities aren't right. There's no like philosophy preprint server that I'm
No.
aware of. Right. The disciplinary norms are quite different. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that there's a pretty uneven uptake of the use of preprints, but also just the embrace of openness generally.
Yeah, absolutely. This science arts divide is very, very visible in the lack of preprints in some of the humanities. Can we talk a little bit about AI, which is a big enough topic for us to talk for the entire interview?
Yeah.
So going back to that Clarivate survey, another interesting finding was that the largest area where libraries expected to introduce AI tools, they were saying, was providing tools for student learning, which I assume is such things as open educational resources. Is this something that Denver's been involved with?
Not really. I mean, we've had conversations, and I've seen some really interesting demos of annotation software, for instance, and the incorporation of AI into creating questions for students to engage to use as they study the document, for instance. You know, our Office of Teaching and Learning has been thinking about AI in the context of student learning. We've been thinking about what sort of library tools we can provide. But I think it's been mostly about learning so far, right? We haven't, as far as I know, we haven't adopted anything at the campus level yet. There could definitely be. I'm certain there are individual instructors who are using AI in their classes at some level, and there's certainly use of AI in for research. We're engaged in it, but I don't know offhand if anybody is using any of these these student learning tools specifically.
Yeah, that's a good point, because one of the most visible effects of AI is this proliferation of tools to assist in the scholarly process. And I could list so many, but Cite.ai and Scholarcy are just two examples. So do you think the library has a role in this area?
Yeah, for sure. And we've got, some of our librarians have taken it upon themselves to learn about the different tools and to offer workshops for the community, right? So we are engaged in that way. I think the library has to be in the same way that we provide access to citation software. Right. I think to the extent that there are tools that help support research, especially tools that help find information, that's a library role. And some of those tools are going to be integrated into our discovery systems and into the right, sort of at a very fundamental level, are going to be integrated into what the library does. Some of those tools are going to be things that maybe we keep track of and link to and help our community understand. But it's hard to imagine that we're not going to be deeply involved in providing AI tools to the community on some level.
That's nice to hear, because I think of myself as an expert in this area, but I sort of get overwhelmed by the sheer number of tools around. It's just impossible to keep up with what's going on.
Right. Yeah, and if you think about tools to find to find information about whatever discipline, right? I think that that's been the case now for 20 plus years, that that's been overwhelming, and the library has played the role of helping the campus community navigate that complexity, right? We help them get to the right tools, and AI is no different, right? We should be trying to understand which of those tools work well, which don't, how to use a particular tool in a responsible way. What are the ways in which a user can actually benefit from using an AI discovery tool versus, I guess, as an uninformed user, you might actually be getting bad results if you don't know how to use this particular tool.
Yeah. Nonetheless, the survey was entitled, this Clarivate survey was optimistically entitled "The Transformative Role of AI on Shaping the Future of the Library." Unfortunately, the survey itself was a bit short on exactly what that transformation was going to be.
Yeah.
Do you feel that? I mean, do you feel?
Yeah.
That,
I mean, go ahead.
No, I mean, do you feel that there is a transformative role that AI might offer the library?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think of two broad examples. One is improving discovery. AI that can help make the use of what are fairly complicated and not intuitive. The digital discovery tools that we use are not easy to use if you're say a brand new student. So I think AI can help make those tools work better, and in some ways maybe even help them work better for a particular user with a particular set of needs, right? So if you think about the discovery system, the Primo or EDS and so on, they try to be all things to everybody, and to the extent that AI can start to learn who you are as a user and what types of information you actually need, right? That's an example, I think, of where we might be able to improve the user experience. It's also possible that AI could send the user in the wrong direction in those cases, right? So I think we need to be really careful of it. But I do think that there are going to be lots of ways in which we use AI to improve the discovery experience. And, with hallucinations so far, it has absolutely not been the case that it can help you with something like a lit review. But I think we're going to get to the point where doing a lit review would be a great example of how you can save your time. Yeah. And the other thing that I think is going to transform libraries is metadata creation, right? That AI will be able to take a batch of photographs or a batch of documents or a batch of books or a batch of scores or whatever kind of information source you want, and give you not perfect metadata, but will give you the pretty good metadata that might be enough to put right into the catalog, or might be enough to be ready with a little bit of human interaction. And it's hard to imagine that not happening. And I've seen some demos already of people who are working on that sort of thing. So I think that those are just two areas in which we are going to be transforming the way we do our work, and I think within a very short number of years, we're going to look back and not be able to imagine not working with AI.
I agree, and I think your point about metadata is an absolutely valid one. The thing that shocked me on I'm involved in my day job with repositories, and the thing that shocked me was the amount of manual work from people looking up individual bits of metadata in a way that I'm sure could be automated much more effectively than currently happens. Um,
Yeah.
well, this is it's fascinating talking to you, Michael. I don't know how you managed to sort of to cram all these. We've only touched on some of the aspects of things that you do. Do you get any leisure time? What do you what do you do outside the library?
um, uh, I like to take naps, but I also, I really enjoy, I enjoy photography. I try to travel with a camera, and I also try to get up into the mountains as often as possible to take sunrise photos. And I also love to cook and love to, which is good because I love to eat.
Sounds great. Sounds fascinating. Well,
Yeah.
look, it's been great talking to you, Michael. I've very interesting to get your views, I look forward to hopefully meeting you at this year's Charleston conference.
Yeah. Looking forward to it. And yeah, enjoyed the conversation as well.
Lovely. Thanks very much.
Oh, you're welcome.